Hello and welcome to our first episode of Crystal Cast for 2024. My name is Ross and I'm an immigration lawyer based in Sydney, and I would like to introduce my co-host Juan Silva, who's going to be joining us for this episode. Welcome, Juan.
Thank you so much, Ross. Thank you for this great opportunity. I'm happy to be here co-hosting these episodes with you and have conversations about migration and an interesting topic. And a little bit about myself. I'm from Venezuela. I've been in Australia for 12 years. And after having so many experience with visas for myself and debriefing with friends on how to do it, then I became really interested in. Now I'm a registered migration agent, and I love it. And thank you so much for having me.
It's amazing, and it's always good to be able to bounce ideas off one another. So I'm really looking forward to the content that we're going to cover today.
Absolutely, yeah.
Welcome. I would also like to take this time to thank our sponsors. Without these sponsors, we wouldn't be able to bring this podcast on a weekly basis free of charge for you. So thank you very much for all of those who have supported us and continue to support us throughout these episodes. We want to thank 123 Accounting and specifically Jennifer Richardson, who is director of the company.
We would also like to thank Risk Brace from Migration Insurance Brokers.
And we would also like to thank Oasis Real Estate, specifically Paul Wilcox, who's a buyer's agent. And now we move on to our topic of the week. Every week we will bring you a particular topic that's going to be of interest. And of course, in this particular season, we're going to be focusing more on the migration strategy. So I couldn't think of a better way to kick off than the new visa called Skills in Demand visa. So just to give you a little bit of background, so this particular visa will be introduced to target 3 different visa pathways, which we're going to be discussing. And the goal really is to encourage global mobility and being able to be a little bit more flexible when it comes to being able to move employers and being able to transition towards permanent residency. So there's a couple of different streams that are going to be available under this particular visa, and we will introduce those as well. So Juan, the first stream that I want to bring to your attention is the highly specialized stream. Now, it's going to be an interesting one because we also know that global talent visa is going to be sort of dismantled, and a portion of that is going to be transferred to the highly skilled stream. But then you'll also have a number of occupations that are highly paid and highly specialized, and they would be captured by that particular stream. So really the idea behind it, and I should also mention we don't really have any legislation, so we can only go by what we have, but it's going to be to transfer skills across. So really, there's high paid jobs that are able to come to Australia and transfer the skills across.
Yes, Ross, I think this visa is like the embodiment of this whole reformation the Department of Home Affairs is doing to migration. And so what is good about this visa is that it's going to lead to permanent residency.
Yeah.
So its holders are going to have the ability, just like mimicking the TSS visa, is going to lead to permanent residency. Like you said, there are 3 different pathways. It is the high skills, the core skills, and the essential skills.
Let's discuss those.
Absolutely, yeah. Now, speaking about the core skill pathway, Ross, this visa is going to be available for those applicants who meet the general eligibility criteria for this visa program. And of course, it's going to include skilled occupations, all the skilled occupations except for the trade workers and the machinery workers and occupations like drivers and laborers and low skill level occupations. And what's important about this is, and again, mimicking a little bit of the TSS, applicants should be offered a salary at least at the level of the current TSMIT or above.
Excellent. So I suppose almost like a TSS visa, but just a little bit condensed, yes?
Correct, yeah.
Excellent. And Juan, the final stream, which I think everyone's going to be really interested in, is this essential skills pathway. Now, I suppose that there's a couple of things that need to be considered. The essential pathway is going to capture basically the occupations that you said may not be included, like potentially trades workers and your technicians. So what the government has mentioned is that there's going to be further review. It won't be captured by TISMA, so there's going to be a different term used, the core income specialist threshold, and it's going to be hopefully in line with the Fair Work Awards. But again, I stress, we just don't know that yet, so the government is going to seek further consultations, conduct further reforms before introducing that pathway. Now, what's important to keep in mind is that basically the TISMIT is now going to be split into those three categories and will apply accordingly to the category, which makes sense. And the first indexation will happen on 1 July. So in terms of wondering when this visa would be introduced, well, I'm hoping we'll at least get the regulations before then, given that the first indexation is going to happen on 1 July. But it is a really sort of interesting visa, and I'd like us to discuss just a couple of questions that we thought through. Now, Juan, this is obviously a lot of information that we've just condensed. So if we were to compare this to the TSS visa, would it be correct to say that you can, under this visa, work for multiple employers or maybe 2 employers during that period, and that will allow the applicants to still transition towards PR? And how would that work in practical terms?
Definitely one of the greatest advantages of this visa is that it's going to allow holders to work for different employers, and that time is going to count towards PR. That's something that they don't have at the moment, and it's really good because life happens and situations happen where the relationship in between the employer and the employee may break down, and what happens next? Like, are you going to lose all of that? Which is what happens at the moment, and a lot of problems happen. People have to sort out all the solutions for them to stay in Australia, but then this visa allowing that counting towards permanent residency sounds even more fair for the applicant.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. So there's obviously that aspect. The other thing that sort of popped into my mind as you were speaking, you know, what if someone's turning 45? We don't know if there's going to be an age threshold, but imagine if they've worked for that period and they've lost that employer or that opportunity, and now they're going to be 45 or over 45 by the time they clock up that time. And I think we can both say we had our fair share of clients where those situations have happened.
So many cases,
so it really just kind of, I suppose, gives that opportunity to ensure that you haven't lost your time.
Correct. Now, Ross, I would like you to tell us what's going to happen with labour agreement.
Yeah, good question. You know, I think there's been a lot of, I suppose, issues with the way that labour agreements have been implemented and the way that they've been run after the new TISMA was introduced, because the whole purpose of the labour agreements really is to bring down the skills threshold, the English language and the salary. So I don't think that this visa will necessarily get rid of labour agreements. In fact, if anything, I think it will clarify and really bring labour agreements back to its purpose. That is, if you're not on a specialist, the essential and the core skills pathway, then you have to go under the labour agreement and you can negotiate those concessions. So I do think it's going to be quite welcome news for employers. I'm really keen to hear what the salary concessions are going to be, because at the moment, you know, this salary variance of 10% is just a little bit unrealistic for many employers, especially in regional areas. So it'll definitely benefit labour agreements.
Absolutely, very interesting,
Now, Juan, just on this flexibility, being able to work for multiple employers, the other great thing is that there's now going to be a 180-day gap between the first employer, or the last employer I should say, and a subsequent employer. So what we know so far is that the visa holder would be able to perform work during that period. So how would that work in practice? What would that look like?
Yeah, Ross, that's correct. I think again, this is a very fair change that is being introduced in favor of the visa holders, because a lot of the time people get caught in with no work.
Exactly.
They already a lot of the time that they're already going through the trauma of having to break down that relationship with the employer,
Yeah.
and then face the reality of not being able to work.
And bills don't stop, do they?
That's right. So it is very good now that they can work. They can do like Uber Eats, for example, which is a very flexible and quick job that you can get, and that's gonna allow them to survive that time while they find another sponsor.
Yeah.
Because as we know, sometimes it's not an easy task to find an employer who's willing to sponsor you.
Yeah.
So having that ability to work and do something while you find another sponsor is great. It's good. It's gonna be welcomed by everyone.
Yeah, 100%. So things like freelance would probably be available.
100%. The definition of work in the regulation is any activity that attracts money, then you'll be able to do many things.
Yeah, and I suppose on that note as well, it will probably cut down on substantial non-compliance where
That's right.
people work when they shouldn't really be. So I think it is a win-win for both the employees or the applicants and the government.
100%. You're giving the people the opportunity to do something for themselves at that time. Like you said, Ross, that's gonna prevent a lot of the illegal working, which we don't want, because at the end of the day, like, a country is run in fair basis if everyone is allowed to work, which is the basis of
exactly.
our society.
And we don't want sort of substandard work conditions that would be offered, and it really just goes in line with just making sure that everyone complies with the legislation. Well, that's good. I'm really glad to hear that there's going to be some flexibility, and I look forward to seeing the legislation around it.
Yeah. Now, Rose, I have a question for you. What do you think about the trading of the sponsorship fees?
Yeah, look, I think it's a good idea in theory, because I suppose that the reason what we're talking about here is SAF levy, and the fact that it is quite high at the start, and it's meant to encourage employers to basically uptake the sponsorship. My concern with that, my personal concern with that, is how is this program going to be managed? So the proposition is to basically make an employer or a sponsor pay these fees, say on a monthly basis or maybe a quarterly basis. And I would imagine that if you don't pay, it would be a breach of the sponsorship obligation, because the legislation is quite clear that you have to pay the sponsorship fees. So if you don't, then that's a breach. But in practice, how would this work? Well, how are you going to manage hundreds and thousands of sponsors and issue them invoices on a quarterly basis? Let's say even if 5% of them don't pay, are you going to have a debt collector that's going to go after them? I just think it's a little bit unrealistic, and it's a bit too much burden on the department. I think what would have been a smarter way to introduce this would be sort of making it as a secondary visa application charge or an application payment, where all of the criteria for the nomination has been assessed. An employee gets an invoice at the end to say, we're about to approve the nomination, please pay the fee. In my experience, employers do not have a problem with paying the fee. I don't think they're happy, but they don't have a problem with it. But if you give them some assurance that there will be a nomination that will come through by paying that fee, it's going to actually instill confidence in them. So it'll be interesting. I'm sure that there is a plan in terms of how that's going to be managed. I just don't see how it's going to work in practice.
Yeah, right, and it's absolutely interesting to see how they're gonna structure it, hey? Because at the moment it's just plans, but we don't know the details yet.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And you know what it's like, when we try to chase one client for money, that's an effort. Right. Imagine chasing 10,000 people or 10,000 employees, but we'll see how it all goes. And now on to news of the week. We've got quite a few events that have taken place.
Yeah, Rose, let's start with the closure of the 408 visa. That's quite sad because this visa was really, really good.
It was.
It was a reward from the government to those people that decided to stay in Australia during the pandemic event. And yes, it's quite the end of an era because this visa covered a lot of those gaps. And when people didn't have any other choice, they could go for the 408 while being eligible or becoming eligible for other visas. So yes, that's quite a big news.
Yes, definitely. And onto other news as well, which is really important. Now the government is pushing forward the migration strengthening employee compliance bill. Now what does that mean for employers? Well, basically, Juan, this particular bill addresses some of the compliance issues that were identified when it comes to not necessarily just employing foreign workers, but just general terms and conditions of employment. So I think everyone would have seen there's been another change in legislation about switching off and disconnecting from work after hours. So things like that, just making, I suppose, lives for employees a little bit easier and making sure that, you know, vulnerable migrants who may not know where to go if there's an issue, to have those protection rights. So I think that's quite big, and we'll definitely be following that in our Crystal Cast episodes.
Yeah, that's really good. On another news is the introduction of the new Form 1563, otherwise called a Statement of Character. So it's quite interesting because it's going to allow applicants to provide this form when it is not possible or it's nearly impossible to get a police check, an international police check. Speaking about, for example, Afghanistan,
Yes.
where it's virtually impossible to get a police check from there. Now applicants are able to give this form instead.
Yeah, well, it's funny that you've mentioned Afghanistan, and there's other countries as well, but there's basically no instructions on the department's website as to how one would obtain a police check. So, and we had a couple of clients, and it's just a lot of going back and forth with the department. So it's good that there's now an actual document.
Yeah, and it expedites the process of complying with this requirement.
Definitely. And onto VETASES. So there's been a number of issues in relation to trades occupations, and VETASES has now resumed applications for plumbers. So for those who are applying for a skills assessment via VETASES through plumbers, would be able to do so. So the process has now been resumed.
That's right. And another new 180 visas, New South Wales had an invitation
Yes.
round. That was a little bit not unexpected, but a bit of a surprise because there was a long period of time in between the rounds. So occupations like early school teachers were announced, and there was quite a high threshold, like 95 points were the average. The average of the...
Yeah, I heard that there was also a marketing specialist.
Right, yeah.
One of our clients received a skills assessment, a 190 visa for the developer programmer. So it looks like there's been quite a broad range that's been covered.
Right.
Well, speaking of invitation rounds, so just a reminder to everyone, there will be an invitation round held by the ACT, and that's going to be happening on Monday, the 19th of February. We don't know how many places, we just know that the invitation round is going to be held that day.
That's right.
And now on to my favorite part of the episode, which is random question of the week. And just to let you know how it works, every week you're more than welcome to send us a question of your choice. All you have to do is just scan the QR code on your screen for a chance to have your question featured in one of our episodes. So Juan, I might just read out this particular question. So this case involves someone who was on a student visa in high school moving to a student visa at the university. However, there is a catch. During high school, whilst being a high school student, he's been doing some vaping, which has had a few regulatory changes from 1 January this year. The school caught this person a number of times. They've written a school report about it as well. But then the person vaped outside, so in public, and was caught by the police and was reported to the police. The police came, recorded their name. However, there is no official report. Now, the question here is, can this be a breach of character requirements set out in Section 501 of the Migration Act? What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I think in this case, potentially it's a little bit too much to say the person is going to be implicated in breach of Section 501. It seems to me that this is something minor.
Yeah.
However, what we can consider is the amount of time the person was caught, and the fact that the police got involved in that last time that he was vaping outside, and thinking maybe not about a visa, further visa, but later down the track, citizenship.
That's a really good point, Juan.
Yeah.
I completely agree with you. I don't think it would be caught under Section 501 because we need to consider, well, Section 501 is a substantial character issue. So we know from the facts here that they were caught a couple of times. They obviously were cautioned by the police. There's no official report. But citizenship works differently. So if you look at the character provisions in the citizenship, the test is good moral character. And we have had a number of situations where clients would come to us and they had their citizenship refused, even though that character issue existed at the time of visa application.
That's correct. This reminds me of this case of this man that had applied for citizenship, and this person had a high number of drive offences that made the decision maker refuse the citizenship application because, like you were saying, they are evaluating the moral of the person, and too many of these offences amount to resulting in the person considered not of good moral. So it's a thing to consider.
Yeah, 100%, and I think it's a really good question because it does bring character into an issue. And yes, on face value, I don't think it's going to impact this person, you know, when they transition to university. But when you look at the longer term strategy, and there's so much case law on that as well, Juan. If you look at the AT Bulletin publishes those, and well, the majority of the cases that are refused for citizenship are to do with character. And actually, just another case comes into mind. There was a person who was involved in domestic violence, and even though the charges were dropped and was fined for the visa application, in fact they're still together with their partner, it was refused at the citizenship stage. Yeah. So I think with this case, well, the moral of the story really is to, you know, maybe just be a little bit careful about your actions, and if you're planning to stay in Australia for a prolonged period of time, we need to think outside the box. So don't just think about the next visa, but
100%.
think about the overall strategy.
100%, Ross. I agree with you. Yeah.
Yeah. So I think it'll be okay for the purposes of university, but later down the track, we'll see how things go. Well, that's all that we have time for in this week's episode of Crystalcast. Thank you very much for joining us, and Juan, it's been so good to be able to co-host this episode with you.
Absolutely, it's been amazing. It's been great to be here having these conversations, and yeah, looking forward for the next one.
Thank you very much.